am just absolutely hugely delighted to have Cecilia with us as our second keynote. This is the second day of CC Summit, and to have Cecilia here to talk about her work in tackling gun violence and armed conflict, and all the wonderful things that you are doing, Cecilia, which are so inspiring to our community, how you use the power of open to really tackle a critical problem. And so I just think it is wonderful you're here. So without much further ado, I'm going to pass the floor to you, and we're going to hear from you, and then we'll take some questions from the chat, and we've got the hour to do all of this. So over to you, Cecilia. Welcome. Wonderful to see you.
Thank you, Catherine, for introducing me. So, hi everybody, I am Cecília Olliveira, a journalist in Rio de Janeiro, here in Brazil. And it's a privilege to be able to paint a picture of Brazil for you all. Unfortunately, we are not going to look at the whites and beaches, lush green jungles, or sparkling carnival costumes. Although I love it all of that, but today we are talking about dark red blood on black asphalt. And that's because in my work, I cover crime, public security, and armed violence in a country that has more homicides each year than many war zones. So I'm very fortunate to be a fellow of Shuttleworth Foundation, which supports my work as the executive director of an institute I started in 2016 called Fogo Cruzado, which means crossfire in English. At Fogo Cruzado, we track and map every single time that guns are fired as it happens. In Rio de Janeiro metro area where I live, and in Greater Recife, capital of Pernambuco state in northeast of Brazil. So I'm going to tell you about our work, which aims to save lives and stop the violence. And I am also going to explain why a lack of openness is responsible for our existence, and relying on openness has been essential to our success. And I think it's fair to say we have been successful here. Over 400,000 download our app to follow our updates in real time and contribute with information. Over 2,000 new articles have cited our data on armed violence, and over 100 academic studies have been used our information as well. We have also contributed to important progressive moves in Congress, the Supreme Court, and in the public prosecutors and public defenders' offices. But first, I would like to give you all a little background. The Greater Rio area, it's about the same size as Greater Los Angeles, 13 million people. LA was very worried that it had 756 homicides last year, but Rio had almost 2,500, more than 3 times more. In fact, this number not included. In fact, in this number, it's not included in this statistic. In this statistic, it's almost 1,100 killings by the police, which is more than in the whole United States, just one city. So in Rio, it's far from being the most violent city in Brazil. I know that we have all the fame, but we have cities that had that deal with more problem in crime area more than Rio. So we are talking about the whole different order of magnitude. And To explain more, let's go back into 2015. Brazil was kind of different. We had World Cup. World Cup was over. The Rio Olympics were coming, and my city was getting a lot of international attention. Security was getting a lot worse because the community policing program called Police Specification Units, or UPPs, was a few years old, and they are starting to collapsing. The government promised to end organized crime in neighborhoods with UPPs, but it was really just pushing gangs out to the new areas and causing a lot of fighting. So in fact, things were getting worse, not better. And I remember seeing the cover of an independent newspaper here called Voz da Comunidade, or Voice of the Community. It was from a big set of favelas called Complexo do Alemão that had UPPs. The headline said, there had been 100 straight days of shootings in the favela, but this situation was not reported in the big newspapers. So I was looking everywhere for more information, but there wasn't any data. It did not exist. And at that time, I was also trying to write a story about victims of stray bullets from gunfights. And one more time, I couldn't find any data. So Fogo Cruzado was born out of a need that I had as a journalist. And this information was essential for me to tell the story of violence, but the government clearly decide it didn't want to produce this data because it didn't want the story to be told, in fact. And so we had just bits and pieces, just small pieces. So I decided that on January 1st, 2016, I would start tracking shootings myself, just from the people in my social bubble. Everyone was using Facebook a lot. And so it was very common for me to see my friends posting things like, wow, I was walking down the street and there was a gunfight, or today I couldn't live in my house because there is a shooting in my neighborhood, or my bus didn't come because there is a police operation in the neighborhood and they closed the street. These kinds of things. It was common and still common. So it was kind of easy to understand why people are talking too much about the situation. So I was tracking around 6 to 8 cases a day. And it was just a small sample, as I said. It was just my little bubble. But in the quick, I had a lot of data, but I would like to know, what can I do with all this information? I knew my spreadsheet had important information, but I still don't know how I was going to use it. So I talked to a friend that was working on Amnesty International, and we decided to make an app and a website, and that was the beginning of Fogo Cruzado. Now, 5 years later, we are really an institute, an NGO, and Fogo Cruzado has the only database on armed violence in the country. We average 20 to 30 shootings a day. Every piece of information is checked and verified by our analysts before entering our database. So we have a very detailed information about shootings and all their impacts on the cities where we operate. We keep stats about more than a shooting. So we can also provide information about closed schools, victims, shootings in shopping malls, pregnant women and children that were shot, gun battles with police involvement, massacres, a lot of things that are related straight to the gun violence topic. And we publish this information in real time so people can stay safe as it happens, but we can also use this data to push for change, put pressure on the government and politicians, and in fact demand accountability. The government was hiding this information on purpose, so we do the opposite. Everything is open source, open use, open, so everyone can see it and use it. And we help journalists and researchers and officials to use and understand it too. And if you want to use our system to make your own kind of Fogo Cruzado, it's like about any topic at all, you can have it for free. No question asked. Everything is open. And we had, times ago, we had offers to make money selling our data, and we had others to other people like using our data and using it poorly. But we knew that the only way to make the situation better was to make our work open and free and easy to access for everyone. So our focus is armed violence, but really our mission is about fighting secrecy, and that fight is bigger than Fogo Cruzado. And here I'm gonna start to telling you more about how this everything works in fact. Here is a great example of why this work matters. The data about victims of stray bullets, the information that I wanted in 2015, official data used to exist. But the state of Rio just stopped publishing this information in 2012. This means that somebody in the government made the decision to stop producing this information. And what you noticed after that was the headlines about victims of stray bullets just stopped. So literally everyone in Rio is afraid of getting hit by the stray bullet. These headlines are very powerful. The tragic stories start to be called isolated cases or exceptions to the rule because there was no data proving otherwise. So not every case made to the news. So everything that is starting to be published, like one day one case, next week one more case. So everything it's just called isolated cases. But now with Fogo Cruzado producing this information, I can tell you that in the greater area of Rio de Janeiro, we have on average 100 victims of stray bullets per year. On average, it's like 2 cases every week. And there cannot be 100 exceptions to the rule. So that means these are not isolated cases, of course. It changed the way we see our reality and how the media covers it. So the governor, the politicians, they cannot ignore it anymore. Another thing I would like to highlight here, it's about police accountability. The police cause here a lot of the violence, and this is data that the government doesn't want you to know. of course, so they don't produce this information. So taking a look at the mass shootings, the massacres here. Today, I can tell you that 70% of massacres in Rio have police involvement. 70%. It's a lot. So I can tell you that police are a big part of the problem on armed violence, not the solution. Maybe you suspect this before, but now with this information, with this data that we produce, we can prove it with this information that did not exist before our work. One more example of important data that government and police don't want you to know, but we track. Police killed and injured off-duty. The state unpublished data on police killed in the line of duty. But this is just a small portion of police that are killed here. And this is a strategic choice for them. And I can explain you why. Because when you look like around 15 years ago, Rio de Janeiro is being taken over by paramilitary militia groups. And these groups, they are made of mostly police, soldiers, firefighters, etc. And they are gangs that fight to control territory, and a lot of police officers who died off duty, they died while working for these militias. So these militia now control more than a half of the city. So you can see more information, denounces about militia than drug dealers. It's obvious why the government doesn't want to point this out, but that's where Fogo Cruzado comes in. We can confirm that most police officers are killed off duty. They could be doing anything, including criminal activities. And with this kind of data, we can cross-reference with other databases and see when and where they are dying and who controls the territory. And then you can understand more about what's really happening. So this data, it's important, but we want it to be used and really applied. Last year, we joined a coalition of groups who care about armed violence and field, and we filed a lawsuit in the Supreme Court. We demand the police stop unnecessary operations in favelas during the pandemic because a lot of innocent people were dying. We had the stats. So we won the case, and these deaths on the favela areas fell by 70% just right away. At that time, the governor was obeying the court. But we have now a new governor, and this new governor, and his police chief, it's just ignoring the decision since then. The court allowed operations just in exceptional cases. And this new chief of police, he came in and said, okay, we live in a permanent state of exception, so the ruling, it's irrelevant. Police killing, since then, it's just going back up again. So we went back to the court and explained that to the ministers. And we also explained that even though the number of police operations were down, the lethality of this operation is still very high. So we are trying to explain to them that the police have not changed the way that they operate. They are just operating less. And this needs to change, of course. And we need the police to stop killing so much. But the court didn't make the decision, so we still waiting for them to decide how they want to do with this information, how they want to resolve the situation, because the numbers are getting high again. Okay, I think that I would like to show you a very quick video we made recently that illustrates some of these points that I've made.
In Brazil, gun violence is an everyday fact of life for many people. So common, unfortunately, that nobody even bothered to keep track of basic data. How many shots? When? Where? Who was involved? The information just slipped through the cracks. Fogo Cruzado was created in 2016 to solve this problem. We map shootings in real time so that everyone can know what is happening and analyze the impact that it has on our lives. For 5 years, we have been applying technology to our mission of making public security a guaranteed right for everyone. Here's how. Through our app and social networks, we receive information about a shooting. We confirm the facts, log it into our database, and send alerts to our users. The data are available to everyone. Fogo Cruzado has the only open armed violence database in Latin America. Every day, we publish over 20 violence indicators, facts that cannot be found anywhere else. The information that we collect helps to save lives and is used regularly by academics, journalists, and public servants. By tracking cases that were previously undocumented, Fogo Cruzado can prove how serious gun violence is in our communities and that police conduct is often the cause. In other words, when a tragedy does manage to break through and catch the country's attention, it's only with data that we can categorically say, this is not an isolated case. Death is the most tragic and dramatic result of shootouts, but the impact on communities go way beyond that. Schools are closed, trains are canceled, people miss work, children are traumatized. Gun violence affects everyone's lives. Sadly, this is not just the reality in Rio de Janeiro, which gets all of the headlines. That's why Fogo Cruzado is also active in the northeast of Brazil. In 2018, we started a second data lab in Recife, the capital of Pernambuco state, where gun violence is on the rise. In 5 years, we have cataloged almost 40,000 shootings in the Rio and Recife greater metro areas. As soon as a shooting begins, we send an alert via our app. This helps our hundreds of thousands of users stay safe and not get caught in the crossfire. Society needs safety to thrive. Gun violence is everybody's problem. And with our work, we can demand accountability and more effective policies. Fogo Cruzado data has already contributed to judicial decisions and new legislation, including a Supreme Court ruling that suspended non-essential police raids during the pandemic that were killing innocent civilians, and an order limiting helicopters and police operations in Rio. The public ministry studied our data in 2017 and used it to pressure the government to change police strategy and reduce the impact on schools. But there is so much more that must be done. We want to keep making a difference and make every corner of Brazil safer, because security must be a guaranteed right for everyone and not just a privilege for some.
So that's what we do. And what we have learned doing this work, that it's kind of hard work because it's a very sensitive subject to deal like every day. We learned that the powerful hide important data to prevent us from demanding real change. We also learned that collecting this information and applying it can really make difference. And as you saw in the video, we can also save lives with this. And by choosing openness over copyrights and exclusivity, we are multiplying our forces and moving faster than we do if we choose working otherwise. And this, it's true with armed violence in Brazil, but it's also true where you live, on issues that you can care about. So I will leave you all here with a question for you. How can you find a way to use openness to make change for your community? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. And the question, maybe Kat and Alison can put that in the chat. What can you do to make openness part of a solution or a problem that's happening in your community, and what can you do about it? There's a few excuse me, there's a few questions, Cecilia, that have come in during your talk. One of them was just a little bit more about, I mean, how did you get funded? How are you funding the things that you're doing? I think it's all not for profits. We know that's a huge
yes.
Somebody's put that in, and there's also a few asks for sharing the video, so we can either do that at some point during this time, or we can share that afterwards. But tell us a bit about, I mean, how did you go about, funding your organization? How did that work for you?
I used to say that it's like, have a great idea. It's the easy part, because it's the hard part. It's really, how can you make this your living job? Your really work with this. So it's hard. As I said, we created Fogo Cruzado inside the Amnesty International in 2016. Yeah. But we had a very small funding at that time. And we just start to going door to door and asking for money, asking for donations, because we don't have, we just have a time with Amnesty International. So I remember that I had times that I just worked for free. And I really know a lot of people that have done this, because when you have an idea and we are on the beginning of this idea, it's really hard. So now I can tell you that I really have funding for some institutions, but at the beginning was just very hard, because you need to know the people, you need to know how to approach these people, you need to know people that can introduce you to another people, because everybody is very connected. So I was lucky because I had a friend that was working with some institutions that could open the door for me. So this is really something. So it's very important that you work very close to other institutions, because they can have links to help you. So today, I really do this, because it's like, some people came to me today and asked, I have this, I am struggling, I don't have money for more than 2 months, 3 months. How can you help me? And today I am in a position that I can help these people, making links, introducing them to new founding. So it's important also give a hand to these people and like, look, it's your turn, because someone helped me when I needed. So now I am in a position to help you. So this is important. But it's like, funding will be a forever question. There is no a specific answer for this. Will be a challenge forever.
But I'm great. We're so grateful that you've persevered. And you are, after that initial idea, and now you are where you are today. Now, there's a couple more questions. One is from Giovanna, which is, do you have any information about people who happen to use the data and it helped them to stay safe during a shooting at the time it was happening? So it's kind of like, that was quite interesting, because you've got this information, you're getting it out, you have to check, there's all of those things. Your website and the app is really great and interactive, because you can see where things are happening in that time. But it's all around the stories about what you've achieved in such a short space of time, Cecilia.
Yeah, we need to act very fast.
Yes.
So it's like, you have the shooting, and we have just minutes. It's minutes just to check this information and tell people, look, it's happening something here in this neighborhood close to this street. So we have to be very fast. And when we publish this information and people get this information from the app, can decide that, I'm not using this route. I'm going to take this street because the another one, it's happening something there. So we know a lot of people that tell us that, look, I was planning to go to the school taking this route, and I decided to take another one because I saw some information about a shooting close to the area that I used to pass by, or something like people that were already on the area where it started the shooting, and they could trying to find a better spot just to wait for the situation to stop. So unfortunately, we have this kind of information very often.
And it's the thing you say about that, it's getting that information in the quickest time and verifying that as well. That time from when you find something out to verify, to get it to people, it's just absolutely critical. And
there is something that it's like, maybe you cannot understand how shootings happen here, because it's like it is not just one shot. Sometimes the battle can extend for like hours. In 2018, we were watching a situation, and it was a big battle between militias, and this battle was live for 23 hours. So we needed to keep communications with people there, like, look, now it's here, now it's on this corner, and we kept like publishing this information to give people information. Look, this is moving, because of course the gangs are moving, so they cross the street, they take another way, and we are just keeping all this information in. It was like a live broadcasting, basically broadcasting information. So this is the, because when I talk about shootings or shootouts, maybe you can imagine like it was just one situation, 5 minutes. No, can be hours.
And I think you haven't mentioned it today, but I understood that you now, from just the sound of the gunshot, can determine what gun is being used. Is that right? So you're able to identify, and I mean that's really kind of, I mean, that detail that you now have is quite fascinating and also quite frightening as well, that that you can now determine that, and that will determine who you think is involved perhaps as well with is that right, Cecilia? Is that kind of, have I got that right?
Sadly, it is right. Even children can identify, oh, look, this is a pistol. Oh, no, this is a AK. And they can understand this. So even kids can know what they are using. And it's a common joke here on social media when people say, this is a firework, or it's just a gunshot, because it's like it's very common. So it's, people talk about this all the time, and this is why social media are one of our bases to check information, because people talk about this all the time on social media.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Evans put something in the chat. He said, when I was in Brazil, I was taught to use, now excuse my Portuguese, of why Robado website, which is now an app, he said, which I was explained was a crowdsourced open database of all crime, not just shooting, but also robberies and hijacking. Does Fogo Cruzado have any relationship to that, or do you work with them, or you're just interested about whether you know about another organization and sharing that with you?
I remember that I remember seeing this app years ago when we are trying to figure out what to do with this information that we had, and I remember that they stopped feeding the app for a period of time. So it's like there is no way to like use more information about them. But I remember that they had all this information about robbery, rape, where people are selling drugs. So it's a general crime information. But I remember our first discussions about this when we decided like we have to focus on something very specific, because you can get more impact when you just focus, because the government has this kind of information about us robbery. The government has this information, but they didn't have information about shootings and shootouts, because it's like when you have robbery and someone just pull the trigger and you have a shooting, but nobody's dead, nobody was injured. This information about the armed violence was lost. So they didn't have this specific information about armed violence, because they used to classify just the robbery, just the assault. But if you have no victim, you cannot know that this in this situation was also someone using a gun. So you cannot measure this situation, this impact of armed violence. So we focused on produce information that nobody has at that time.
That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And I think Giovanna's put, as a Brazilian, it's so hard to listen to this. We're so tired. And your work, the fact that you seem to work so non-stop with this, I'm very impressed, Cecilia. Thank you for this. So it's really I mean, it's awful what's happening, right? But it's good to see people like Giovanna coming in and praising your work, Cecilia, because people benefit from what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, and we're so grateful that you're able to share your story and be able to do that this evening. Now, Cecilia asked a question to everybody. No one's answering the question. You posed the question to everyone, Cecilia. What can you do? You've seen a pressing problem in your community, and you've gone out and you've addressed that problem in a really practical way. Oh, here we go. Here's some questions, Cecilia, I've provoked. What is the academic background of those who work doing the live updates? Is it journalism? Is it IT? How do you check that? That's an interesting question for some of the people who are helping you. How would you answer that question, Cecilia?
I don't get it. Can you repeat, please?
They're just asking in terms of, is there, when people are checking, or the people that are working with you, you've come from a journalist background, are people working with you more IT based, or is it more journalistic based, or how did you come from being a journalist to now be really leading in that open data world, which is transforming how people are addressing that very sensitive issue around gun violence?
Our analysts, the people that collect this information, receive this information from the app and check all this information, they are journalists. They are journalists. But we have tech people just working on our systems, API, app, and website. So they have a link to make the work going just as good as we need. But for this work that involves more collecting information and checking them, everybody's journalist. Everybody's journalist, or they have some kind of background on communications, on journalism. So basically everybody works on communications or journalism before.
That's interesting. And that's important in terms of how you're communicating the information. There's another question from Giovanna earlier, which I didn't pick up on, which is, do you have any updates about if this project is going to be available in Sao Paulo? So
that's a good question. That's a good question. Everybody asks, why are you not in Sao Paulo yet? But the answer, it's kind of simple in some way, because it's like Sao Paulo has light about everything that Sao Paulo does, because it's a big center. So we are trying to push our work to states where nobody's caring enough, So for the next year, we are planning open in more cities, and we are studying where we'll be, and for understand better what our choosing will be. We study like how the media works there, how is the coverage, how the government works there. Like you have data being producing, you have any information being produced. How is the how the communications are in this city? They have a lot of collectives about communication working on this field, because it's like we want to produce information, and we want to produce journalism in places where they don't have like space enough for what they are doing. In Sao Paulo, it's just a major city in Brazil with a lot of news. The biggest newspapers on the country, they are based on Sao Paulo. So Sao Paulo has attention enough about criminality coverage. So we are trying to go to places where they don't have attention enough. And Rio is the case because I'm living on Rio. So it's like I was starting with a place that it was easier because I was here, and I could try the idea here first. But Sao Paulo I am always thinking about Sao Paulo, because Sao Paulo has a different kind of situation. That is, in Rio, you have a lot of gangs and a lot of militias battling every day. In Sao Paulo, you have a monopoly. So they don't fight every day in every corner. They have the monopoly of violence. Of course, they kill a lot. They battle with the police, but it's a different situation. So it's nice to think what can we see over there, because it's a very different situation from Rio and other states. In Rio, you have PCC, that's the name of the main gang working there. But the PCC is also operating in a lot of states and countries in Latin America and even further. So it will be interesting to understand how PCC operates outside Sao Paulo.
And how have you, I mean, you were saying about this is really, challenging the police, challenging the government. How have you dealt with that? Because clearly when you challenge authority and power, affect change. Others have been doing similar in their own communities. How have you dealt with that, Cecilia, both personally and professionally?
Oh, that's a good case. Is a good question, Catherine, because it's like the authorities and the government, they don't like to deal directly with us, because it's like if they put you in the same spot, it's like they are saying that they care enough about you, and you are good enough to be in the same table. So they try to keep us far as they can. But last week we published information saying that after the police killed a militia guy working in some area here, the shootings in that area dropped like 30%. So for them, it was a good information. So the governor shared our data, and the police chief that I mentioned that was battling with Supreme Court, they also shared our information. But I remember that I quote them and said, of course, you can say that, but you need to say that this is a temporary situation. Because it's like there is no place with no command. It's just, there is nobody here today, but tomorrow it's another day. And in fact, the day after, it was a big battle with like 7 deaths, a lot of bus on fire on the street. So I come back there and said, as I said, it's like, it's temporary. You need to work better, because it's like one day, it's not simple. It's not simple. But at least he shared this information and basically said, they have information to be shared.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Cable's come in and saying about, to your question, this is back to the question you asked at the end of your presentation about what can you do to combat social issues within your own community. Cable's come and said about his work on the UN Sustainable Development Goals and picking the challenges, asking how open and better sharing can help solve the challenge around, and he'll use open education to work on the SDG 4 in the community that he works in, open education. Something that I keep thinking about is air quality and open data, and we're moving towards the big climate conference coming up as well, and how you can use open data to be able to affect and make choices about air quality and making better decision making. You found that with open data, haven't you, Cecilia, that it's about making better decisions, it's making choices, and the choices that people are making could be are life and death choices in the area that you're working in. What has been your learning from doing this work? What would you say to the audience today has been your greatest learning?
That's a good question, Catherine, because it's like, as I mentioned before, sometimes government choose information to not produce. It's like they just choose this information. I don't want to know about this one, so let focus on this one. And it is, if you are producing an information, you are producing what people can say about this information, basically. So when the government choose not to produce something, they are telling that this you will not talk about. We are not talking about this. So we are not putting this subject on the table, and that's it. So when people decide to produce this information, it's like you are not on the table, but you are putting things on their table for them to discuss. I remember when someone that lives on Amazonas, that is a state on north of Brazil, inside the Amazon forest, and they are using our app, not the app, the technology, to map where they are, where you can see deforestation. So it's like you can address this information to the government because you are seeing this. You are there and you are seeing the situation, and you can tell, look, I am producing this information, and you have a choice to ignore them, and I can go to the press, I can go to universities, and I am making this your problem, or you can have this information cross with this information that you already have and try to produce some more information, more discussion, and try to resolve the situation. You can choose, because it's like we are chatting about this, we are discussing about this, and you are invited. If you want to come, that's good. If you don't want to, we are addressing all the problems to you anyway.
Interesting that the technology is being applied to a pressing environmental problem like deforestation, and informing in as real time as you possibly can do about what's happening in a local community. So again, that's a really good example of a local area dealing with a pressing problem and trying to address it because they always say that all politics is local, and how you're addressing things and dealing with things is very much on a local level. I think that's fascinating, Cecilia. I'm still encouraging people. We've got 7 minutes left in the chat to answer Cecilia's question, but maybe if I can go back to your original kind of when you were looking at victims who had been killed by stray bullets and there was no information recording on that. What happened next in terms of that story that you were seeking as a journalist, and how have you helped those victims be able to tell their story, Cecilia?
I remember a case here, Catherine, that it was a child, Agatha. Agatha has 8 years old when she was killed. Mm-hmm. And one of information that we produce, it is information about how many kids are injured or killed by armed violence here. And I remember that everybody was shocked because it was a kid. And one of the things that we are able to say, it was Agatha was not the first, was not the second, was not the third. And we released information with 20 names, ages, and locations where kids were being killed or injured by gun violence. So we brought this information to the news, and the governor was pressured to say, like, it's like, you cannot say that it's a isolated case because it's like 20 kids. How can you say that? You cannot. Yeah. And I remember that the bar association here, that association about lawyers, the bar association, used our information to pressure the governor and said, look, we saw this information and we saw that it was not a straight bullet as the police said. It was a direct police action. So then with the investigation, we proved, not our investigation, but investigation was finished, our information was there saying, look, this kid was killed by a cop. And you could see this information before because we had people that was collaborating with us locally. So we could say, look, people are saying that it was not a straight bullet, it was not an accident. A cop pulled it, and our information was used by the bar to push the investigation. And that was how you can pressure everybody. You need to talk with all these big actors in the scene, right? To be able to pressure, to be able to collect information, and prove our point that it was not isolated, it was not an exception, and you can see, because we have a list, and this is happening day by day.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story with us, and sharing Agatha's story with us, because it puts a human face on a tragedy, which is something which you've been looking at for and trying to get to the truth to help those families who have been affected by gun violence in your community. Now we're almost at the end of our time. I am going to the chat. We've got 3 minutes, and if people are not going to put any more up, I think we've gone through all the questions, and we've looked at this, looked at different parts of the conversation with this. I think, Cecilia, your question is still important about everyone. What can we do to combat social issues? And it's the social issues within our own communities is so important. And I think if there's any question that people can take away is your example of dealing with something in your community that you've found an answer to, and being able to take that forward in terms of your own investigative journalism, your own skills, talent and ability to make a difference, and to help families like Agatha's and others to be able to hold authority both to account and to seek justice as well. So I think that, we can't thank you enough for coming to share your journey through what you've done with openness, and it's your passion, your ideas, your thoughtfulness that we will all take away from this conversation this evening. So I think you've been so moving and inspiring, Cecilia. I can't thank you enough for joining us and spending time with us today. And I know it's evening my time. I don't think it's evening your time yet, but it's lovely that we could have this conversation, even when it's a hard subject as gun violence and what that means in communities. It's an example of how action can lead to change. So I want to thank you on behalf of all our summit attendees. Now all these people are thanking you so much for being here, and you all know that this is recorded, and if you haven't managed to see this live just now, you can go back into Hopin and see it too. And Molly, our board chair, said thanks for an inspiring session about the real power of open. So thanks, Cecilia, and thank you to all of you who've listened to this today. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for taking a look in Brazil, and thank you all the summit that was here to listen to me and listen about what are we doing here in Brazil. Thank you. Thank you.